Hi, I am Jennifer Purcell, and welcome to my podcast, Living with an Invisible Learning Challenge, where we will discuss, discover, and learn more about the challenges and triumphs of those with NLD and other learning challenges. I do have a website for this podcast, and it is called livingwithnld.com. I also have a Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter account for the podcast. They are all under the same name, which is Living with NLD. I also have a YouTube channel for the podcast, which can be found by Googling the title of the podcast, which is Living with an Invisible Learning Challenge. I would like to tell you about a nonprofit that I use for my research for this podcast. It is called the NVLD Project, and I use their blog for my research. They are a nonprofit that is based in New York and is trying to get NVLD back on the DSM, and they provide many resources for people with NVLD on their website. I'll provide you with the website for them in the podcast description. All proceeds from the ads on this podcast will be donated towards the NVLD project. Please feel free to explore the other topics on the podcast, and hopefully you will learn something new from them. I hope you enjoy today's episodes. Before I go into that, I thought I would address that this election is going to be very important, and I am not telling you how to vote. I'm just encouraging you to vote. If you are 18 years old or older, I encourage you to vote and to do a lot of research so that you are informed on what you're voting on and that you are able to do well with the voting process and be informed on it. And I am also an ambassador for the NVLD project, and then NVLD project is trying to get the NVLD back on the DSM, which is a manual for mental and learning disabilities, and it helps people get accommodations in school and in life by defining what the disability is and how it affects you in life, and by showing examples and evidence of it, and by giving a clear definition of it. So that's what the DSM is, and they're trying to get NVLD back in there. And in order to do that, they renamed NVLD to developmental visual spatial disorder. I always forget the D. My hope is that when they do that, they will list all the symptoms, because nonverbal wasn't a very good name for it either, but neither is developmental visual spatial disorder, because it's not just developmental and visual spatial, it's also the social, which nonverbal doesn't have either. So it's like, my name that I've kind of developed for it, which I'm not sure if it's very good either, is invisible learning spectrum disorder. But I don't know that's very good either. So anyways, and this podcast is also supported by Patreon and Spotify and BetterHelp. So BetterHelp is a therapy company that does therapy online and remotely. I have not used BetterHelp, but I know they're very good, and I have been in therapy for more than 8 years, I think 8.5. I'm not doing it currently, but I was doing it last year, and it was very helpful for me when I was doing it online and remotely. It was very helpful for me. It was able to change a lot of things in my life and make my life better. So if you want a discount for BetterHelp, I'll include the link for that. And Patreon is a way for me to give you the episodes without any ads like I'm doing right now. And I give you access to transcripts as well and to the episodes without any ads. So if you want that, it's either $5 for the episode without any ads or $10 with the transcript. I know that might seem like a lot of money, but I'm not really not doing it for the money. I'm trying to do it so I can donate the money to the NBLD project, or so I can do it to pay back on my website subscription fee. So um, if you're willing to do that, please do. I will give the link for that as well in the description. And I also have podcast swag. I will get the link for that as well. T-shirts and water bottles and tote bags and other pretty cool stuff. So I will give the link for that as well.
To your struggles, right? Even if they don't know better, you don't have a right to be mad at them.
Mm-hmm.
You have a right to be frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to recognize that they just don't know a lot about you right now, and we need to be patient. Because I think my kids get mad at their parents, and my kids get mad at their teachers, and my kids get mad at their peers. And I think this might be my own personal bias, but I don't have a very high tolerance for anger. Like, it's just an emotion that I feel like eats at you and keeps you stagnant. So as a teacher, what I try to do is teach that flexibility and teach that resilience and teach the grit of saying, like, this frustration that you have, I don't want to minimize it. I will validate it, but you need to be in control of how you respond, and how long you sit with it. So that's something that I would want my neurodivergent students to really take to heart. And I do this periodically with them already, but like for future students or students I don't know, everybody's a person. Everybody has a story and everybody has struggles, whether it's something that's diagnosable and you have a name for it or you don't.
Yeah, that's definitely a good way of thinking about it, because there is a difference between frustration and anger. Sometimes that's hard to realize.
Oh, it's so hard. It is so hard for me as a person. Like this morning, I got super triggered because I had a friend send me something and it was so the opposite of being an ally to women and especially disabled women. And I was just kind of like, I know you're sending this to me because you want to hear my opinion, but like, I can't give you like anything nice, because my initial reaction is like, why would you even watch this? Why would you even send this to me? As opposed to sticking through that conversation and saying like, let's talk later in the day.
Yeah, that makes sense. What kind of environment do you try to have in your classroom for students, both neurodivergent and neurotypical?
So you can't see it right now, and neither can the listeners. So let me just describe it. I love my space. I'm really excited about it. It's a big room that has a divider down the middle. I'm looking at it right now. And so we pull it apart so that if students need like quiet testing space or independent workspace, they're on one side of the classroom. And then we have our loud active space. So I'm sitting in the back corner right now, and there are group work tables. There are 2 of them, as well as a row of single tables that a teacher could pull up and do one-on-one work with them. Got lots of whiteboards so that you can just throw up your ideas and get them organized in ways that make sense. And then we have our teacher desks spread out everywhere so that everyone is accessible at some point. This back corner, it's in the process of like getting updated, but this is like my sensory corner. So I've got all my fidgets right along the wall. I have a chair across from me that has the big bouncy ball. So like if you have excessive energy, get it out. But then we also have our coloring books and like our quiet meditation stuff of like, if you need to like destimulate, you can also do that too. So that's in terms of like actual space. I think in terms of like classroom culture, it's one of those, you know, we're all in here for different reasons. We all have an IEP, which is inherently individual. So we hold you to the same standards, but we know that you're going to take your own path to get there. And everybody has different needs from the teacher. So I feel really great about that culture. I feel really great that our students respect each and every one of us, right? Because we're a team.
Right.
And we work really collaboratively with the general education staff, pushing into those classes, supporting as necessary. So every single one of our students can be a teacher, right, for us. But we also recognize that we're not going to know everything either. So there's a lot of patience and a lot of endurance and a lot of, we're going to star it and send you back to your general education teacher for office hours to talk about it because they're an expert in that. And I'm just an expert in disabilities.
Yeah, that definitely sounds like a good environment and space for your students to be able to, you know, get rid of energy if they need to, or, you know, stimulate in different ways.
Yeah.
I like that. Have you had any previous special ed students done better in their education career because you were, you know, there for them?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. So like I said, I had 14 students graduate this year, which is huge, right? I think I had 16 seniors, and one of them is the student with ADHD that I talked about earlier, who like was in the pit and so needed to take an extra year. She's doing great. I think a lot of my kids would say that I was the difference between them graduating and not graduating. I also have several students who are younger that I think I've made a really important impact for. One of my sophomores lost her mom in January. And so she already has an emotional disability and then was going through the grieving process. And so we worked together to come up with a way for her to do school remotely. So she could just take her grief period and not come to school consistently triggered and need to go home like midday. We were kind of like, if you can be consistent at home, then you're going to have a better educational experience. And she passed all of her classes, even in the wake of this loss. I have another student who was diagnosed with NLD this year, and she struggled so much with her executive function, incredibly bright, as we know that people with NLD typically are. But she really struggled with her executive function and her social skills. And so part of her IEP was for us to do a lot of role plays and social stories of talking about like, why are we fixated on these areas of like wanting a boyfriend, trying to fit in with a popular group of people, what to do when you find someone vaping in the bathroom, right? And so her mom and I text very frequently, and I try to be as supportive as I can. But like the student would not have qualified for an IEP, right? NLD is not one of those specific learning disability categories. It's not an emotional behavioral category. It's not autism. It doesn't fall under IDEA. But because I knew about the disorder, I knew what interventions I could provide for her under the categories of other health impairment, and really be able to support her growth as a young woman, and be the teacher for her that I wish I had had, that I'm sure all of us wish we had had. So that was another really valuable experience. I think I've been better because I know all of my kids too.
Mm-hmm.
There's a special place in my heart for all of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, I think I asked you this question before, but you know, I know sometimes that you um, use isn't the right word, that you reveal to your students or your clients that you have NLD as well to kind of help relate to them.
Yes, I self-disclose all the time, and sometimes I don't go as specific as saying NLD. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
I'll say like, "Oh, I have a fine motor disability," or "Oh, I have a social learning disability," or "Oh, I have a right hemispheric deficit," or
More
whatever it
general.
is that each of my
Yeah.
kids kind of struggle with. I'm able to say like, "Oh, you have dyscalculia." That is just like me because
Mm-hmm.
I've always struggled with math.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think actually like my struggles with math makes me a stronger math teacher, which is kind of fun.
Mm.
Um, it's just fun. I had to work so much harder, so I remember what I
Yeah,
have to know. Um,
that's a good point.
but but yes, I think it's really valuable for each of my kids to be able to identify with me because they're able
Mm-hmm.
to see like me being a successful adult with a
Mm-hmm.
disability like theirs. And the strategies that I use have a lot of merit and weight because it's like, oh, Mr. Spoli's kind of like me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I don't try to like exploit them or like misrepresent myself, but I think sometimes it's easier to say, like, any diagnosis you have is just a name for a collection of symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
And if our symptoms match, we can really meet on that same level. So instead of representing it as, I have your disability, I refer to it as the overlapping symptom.
Yeah, I like the way of doing that. And, I'm sure that it helps them out because then they know they're not alone
Yeah.
and um, and that they have someone that they can talk to about it that actually really gets it, you know, as opposed to like, for neurotypical, of course, they can imagine what it's like and try to understand it and be aware of it, but it's hard for them to feel, you know exactly what it's like because they're not neurodivergent.
Mhm.
Um, so I think that's definitely good that you do that when it's applicable. Um, so for your parents, are there any of them that you try to um, you try to give constructive feedback to, like so that they can help their child better, who is your student?
Yeah. So part of the way that I have to like organize my life in order to be a good teacher is I have a resource library. So
Hmm.
all of like the interventions that I use, I've categorized into a Google Sheet with links to each of them so that other members of my team can use those and be consistent with what interventions we're using for our kids. And part of that is parent resources. So I have a lot of parent resources for like traumatic brain injury, ADHD, emotional disorders, autism. Um, so I will give parents those when they ask. I think
Hmm.
there are a lot of parents that don't really ask, and so it's really hard to feel respectful of them and
Yeah.
also say this is what you need to do for the benefit of your student because I just don't have that authority at a
Hmm.
school as opposed to how I did as a provider for the state. Um,
Hmm.
so it's a challenge. And a lot of parents seem to think that they know better than me. And um, so I defer to my supervisor and I say, I'm not taking this, I'm not touching it, I'm not doing this one. Um, Philosophically, I'm not gonna work with this parent.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think I already know the answer to this question, but are there, like, with the amount of students you have and the amount of parents you have, uh, how many parents do get involved? And don't with helping out?
I would say I had about 10% of my parents really help out.
Hmm.
I had, yeah, so my caseload was about 33 students, and I
Hmm.
had like three really like all hands on deck parents that I can think of. And I've talked about each of their kids in this conversation already.
Yeah.
I think I had another 10% of the parents that were really receptive. So they weren't like
Hmm.
talking to me all the time. Like I wouldn't have like daily conversations with them. But whenever I would send them an email, they were always really good about the content and getting back to me, and they were really supportive at home.
Hmm.
Um, and maybe that was more like 20 or 30%. So then there was the other 60% that, or I'd say 50% that were pretty uninvolved, didn't really
Hmm.
communicate with me outside of the annual case review conference. And then 10% that were belligerent. So there aren't that many parents that are awful, but there are a lot that are just uninvolved.
Yeah. Yeah. That's unfortunate. I mean, I am glad that there are some that are involved because that makes it easier not only for you but for their student. Um, what I feel like there should be one more question I was going to ask you about. Is when you think back on, all the people, all the students and parents that you've interacted with, is there any one that, or maybe a couple that, like ones that have graduated and you're able to hear about how they're doing in college, hopefully, um, like they are still doing really well, even though you're not there?
Yeah. So part of a high school student's IEP is a transition plan. So
Hmm.
really looking at post-secondary life. So we're talking with them throughout their entire time in high school about what are your goals for your education, for your employment, and your independent living.
Mm.
And so for my seniors, part of the way that we support their transition towards those goals, right? You're no longer in high school. These are the things that you say you want for yourself. So how are we going to get there?
Hmm.
Is by building a transition portfolio, um, which will allow students to prepare all the materials they need to get a job after high school, to take a gap year and apply for colleges, or to go into college.
Hmm.
So I worked with each of my seniors on developing this portfolio, and um, I know a lot of them have had really wonderful summers. Um, they're not in school yet, but they
Hmm.
know all of their rights as a student with disabilities. They know how the IEP gets transferred into the 504 and how to set up appointments with their student disability services office so
Hmm.
that they have their their advocate, right? They don't have a
Right.
case manager like me anymore, but they have an advocate. And I think that that's the most important thing, is that my students know they can reach out to me and email me at any time, right? Once my kid,
Hmm.
always my kid.
Mm.
Um, but they're really ready. They're
Hmm.
really ready for this new phase of life. And so um, I will continue working with them as well as their parents. If they need me to counsel with the university or get an IEP sent, I can do that. But every single one of the kids has their most recent IEP as
Yeah.
well as their evaluation data in their portfolios. So they really have everything that they need without me.
Hmm. Well, that's good for them. I mean, being able to have that and then also, you know, have access to you if needed. Um, I wish I had
Right. I
that.
know. Like I said, be the teacher that we wish we had.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Someone to be our executive function, to be like, okay, this is how I get organized, and these are all the checkpoints and my timeline.
Hmm. Yeah, I wish I had had that extra help in
The
high school
transition, yeah.
because it would have been easier in college if I did. Um, well, thank you for being able to have me interview you today. It was really fun getting to learn more about your teaching.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And I wish you the best of luck with Eric and Ruben. I think they're both going to have really interesting insight because both of them are general education teachers predominantly, but they see a lot of students with disabilities in their spaces.
Hmm.
Um, right. With Eric, being in music, this is the time where students with creativity really shine through.
Yeah.
Um, and with Ruben, having so many students like fail his class and all the support that he puts into helping them. Oh my
Hmm.
gosh, they're going to be some phenomenal interviews. So,
Yeah. Thank you for reaching out to your team. I'm excited.
yes. Um, Let me know how it goes. My computer is actually going to die pretty shortly. It's at
Oh,
8%.
let
So,
me. I'll stop the recording then.